Hello and welcome. A prolific writer with an intriguing and sometimes quirky style, her talent has made her a hit with both the literary critics and the reading public. Over the years, she's risen to become one of the most eminent authors around. This week on 101, meet the hugely popular Canadian novelist and poet, Marget Atwood. Life for her began in remote northern Quebec, where her father studied insects in the forest. It gave the young Marget Atwood a colourful outdoor life and the ability to build her imagination. She started writing plays and poetry at the age of 6 on subjects far ahead of her years, early evidence of her skill in crafting words, a skill that won her numerous awards, including the Booker Prize for her 2000 novel The Blind Assassin, although it was The Handmaid's Tale 16 years earlier that first brought the Canadian author to international prominence. Since then, Atwood has not only steadily built her fan base, but also much respect for her continued activism for human rights and environmental awareness, an echo of her early life outdoors. Marget Atwood, wonderful to talk with you.
Lovely to be here.
Now, you know, it's interesting, often when people describe you, they describe you as one of the world's leading female authors. Should it really matter whether you're a leading female author or male author?
Well, are those the only two choices?
No, I mean, in the sense that, is it, you know, should there be a division? Because I know you're quite an activist when it comes to rights, especially women's rights.
Well, you know, it sounds that way, but in fact, I'm so old that I'm pre that generation, and when it came along, I got the advantage of it, but I didn't invent it. I have a lot of female characters in my books, partly because I'm lazy. It's easier. But I also have some male ones. In fact, I've written an entire book from a male point of view, whereupon everybody who had been saying, how come you write so much about women, immediately said, why did you write this? So you kind of can't win, but of course I'm interested in women. They're interesting. When we talk about women's rights, I'm much more interested in what's available to them by law, for instance, and what sorts of opportunities they have available to them, and how improving their education improves the economy, which it does.
One thing that makes you different from many of your contemporaries and people in your profession is the diversity of writing. Not just long-form novels, you do short stories, children's books, poems, screenplays, radio plays. It's actually, they all require a very different discipline. How are you able to jump between the different styles?
Well, I'm so old that creative writing classes had not been invented.
So you can ignore the advice.
Well, nobody told me not to. You know, nobody told me I shouldn't be able to do that. And when you look back into literary history, in fact, a lot of writers have done that. They were never streamed. They were never said, well, all right, you're a novelist, you have to be in this class, or poets over here. So I just did them all. There's one thing I've never done, and that is I've never written a full-length stage play. It's a very specialized form.
Now, I don't think you should say old. I think you should say wonderfully experienced. Now, in that respect, what style gives you the most satisfaction? What is it that you really enjoy doing most?
I can't answer that question because obviously if I really hated doing something, I wouldn't do it. But I can tell you that the hardest thing for me to write is book reviews, because you have to be fair. At least I feel I have to be fair. It's very difficult to avoid making funny jokes at the expense of the author. And I won't review books that I don't like. And why do I do it at all? Because it's like giving blood to the Red Cross. If nobody gave blood, there wouldn't be any blood. So we should all write some reviews just to keep that conversation going, even though it's hard.
When someone reviews your books, how sensitive are you to what they say?
I never read those reviews until sometime afterwards. And then a dire fate overcomes all the people.
How much do you see the need for commentary to be a part of your work? I mean, is it possible for writing to be just sheer enjoyment, if I can use that term, as opposed to social commentary? Do you feel there has to be something in there?
You mean, should a book be entertainment? It's the old conversation, instruction versus pleasure, and that debate has been going on for several thousand years. Let's put it this way. If you can't get the person past the first 5 pages, they're never going to get to your brilliant insights and wonderful contributions to whatever it may be. So the first thing you really have to do is tell a story that somebody wants to follow. And if you only do that, it's what we call a beach book. You know, you read it once, that's it. If you don't do that, people won't read it much at all because it will not carry them through.
Your work is often described as science fiction, but you say it's actually speculative fiction.
Well, this is another old debate. Let's say that science fiction is a great big banner, and then underneath that banner you've got 2 categories that descend from 2 different families. Science fiction proper descended from H.G. Wells, and speculative fiction descended from Jules Verne, who wrote about things that he thought really could happen, whereas H.G. Wells and such things as War of the Worlds wrote about things that were very unlikely.
The potential for reality is the key, is it?
Yes. Speculative fiction gave us, for instance, Brave New World in 1984, and science fiction gave us a galaxy far, far away and in another time.
Well, let's see where it all began. Let me take you back to those early years in Ottawa where you were born and raised. What were your strongest memories from that time?
Well, I was born in Ottawa, and I have been unable to determine when. I know it was after the football game was over. That's all I know, because they weren't keeping records then, yes. And then 6 months later, I was put into a pack sack and trekked into the northern Quebec bush, which is where I really spent what the French call my petite enfance. So winter in Ottawa, and I remember the huge snow forts we used to build, spring, summer, and fall, up in the woods with no electricity, running water, films, television, or basically other people.
Your father was an entomologist, and you spent
Yes.
a lot of time in the bush with him.
That was why.
Yeah. To what extent were you fascinated by what he did in terms of interested, or was it something like a burden because he did it, you had to go along?
No, we were just there. That's where we lived. And young children are inherently interested in other living creatures. They just are. Take any kid out, show them anything that's moving, and they'll be interested in it. So we spent a lot of our time doing that, not because we had to or were told to, but because it was there.
How did your father influence you? What sort of character was he?
He was actually a very good character. As people say, I know that dad bashing was a fashion a little while ago, but I missed out on that.
That's good.
I have to have my characters have different fathers to be horrible people. So he was actually pretty much splendid all the way through. And one day I suppose I will write something resembling the story of his life, which was pretty remarkable. He came from a very rural, backwoods Nova Scotia place. He educated himself. He put himself through with odd jobs and scholarships, and that was in the 30s during the Depression. So it's a pretty interesting, not sure how he did it, but he was very handy. You know, he could live in tents and...
And your mother? Any sort of contrasting
My
characters?
mom married him, I think, because she hated wearing hats and, and going
She had to
tea
wear nets
parties.
to avoid the
She was
insects.
a very outdoors, athletic type of person. So what they really loved to do is go on canoe trips and go off into the woods and things like that.
You apparently studied writing at the age of 6, but it was like morality plays and those kind of things, really? Was it that deep?
We wrote comic books. I wrote poetry at that time, but only because I had some extra pages left in the book that I had made, in which I wrote a lot of other poems, and then there was some left over, so I filled that in. I wrote my first novel at the age of 7. It was about an ant. Told me some good narrative lessons. First 3 stages of an ant's life, nothing happens. So I'm trying not to construct my books like that ever since. So yes, we did write a lot because writing, drawing, and reading were what you did when it was raining. There were no toys and gizmos and TV or any of that kind of stuff where we lived.
Now, in terms of formal schooling, I don't think you really got going until you were about 11, I think, into a formal school structure. Is that right?
Well, we would go to school when we were in cities. So the first full year I spent in school was when I was 12. And the rest of the time, now it would be called homeschooling, but we used to call it getting the books from the school and doing the lessons.
How do you think that affected you, being away from that environment of the playground, the children, in terms of developing social skills? Did it have any impact on you?
I had an older brother, so my social skills were partly developed around him. I understand little boys pretty well. Little girls were a bit more of a mystery. I had to really study them. They had some odd habits, but yes, I would say there was an affect there, but it was all pretty interesting.
I was interested to read that at least one of your favorite authors was Edgar Allan Poe.
Terrified me. You could get books out of we still can get books out of the library, but Edgar Allan Poe was in the school library because under the thinking of those days, it was all right for children because there was no sex in it.
Right, a bit horror.
Oh, yes, it was horrifying. Yes, it was, but we also read these horror comics. All pretty scary stuff, kids like that.
Do you think that was a big influence in shaping the way you've looked at your own work?
No.
Any sort of dark side?
No, I think the Second World War probably had more to do with that.
In what way?
Well, born in '39, Canada was already in the war at that moment, so all those first 5 years of my life were essentially war years, and
Sure.
the first 3 of them were pretty scary.
You won a number of prizes for your work, which I'll get onto in just a moment. I'm going to ask you more questions when we return. There'll be more one-on-one with Marget Atwood when we come back. Welcome back. You're watching 101. We're speaking with best-selling author Marget Atwood. You won a number of prizes for your work. In fact, the Blind Assassin got the Booker Prize in 2000, and the others, many of the others, were shortlisted as well as other awards. How important is it for you to get that recognition from your industry?
I think it's very important to have prizes because it is a stimulus to writing in general, and particularly to the book, to the publishing industry. But any sort of artistic award is made subjectively, so it's really not like winning a horse race or a high jump or anything you can measure. So it's always a bit iffy. I mean, you always feel, well, why me?
When it comes to your own work, are you able to pick one of yours as your favorite? I mean, they're essentially your babies. When it comes to actually choosing one, is there one you would say?
Well, it is like that, and in that each one is different, and they have different merits, and my own feeling is that they're listening in, and if I picked one of them above the others, I'd be made to pay for it later.
What do you find the most challenging thing about writing? What is it that challenges you the most?
Beginning.
Really?
Yeah.
So once you got going, it's okay?
Well, you have to make that decision to begin, and you know that it's, particularly with the novel, that it's going to be a long, hard slog. So if you've ever been in northern Canada, it's like deciding whether you're going to go swimming in one of those freezing cold lakes. Am I going in or not going in? So once you've gone in, it's not so bad, but that moment of deciding you're going to do it.
When you've gone through the success rate you have, what do you find to be your defining moments? Have you decided were those moments that burned in your mind as the key moments in your life?
Well, I would say the first one was, apart from having my brother laugh at my morality play when I was 6. Early criticism. Get hardened to it early on. I would say having my first poem accepted by a magazine that was not a college or high school magazine.
How old were you at the time?
I was 20. And so it was a blind submission. I even put initials on so nobody would know I was a girl.
Oh, were you very conscious of that?
Oh, yes, yeah. In those days, right in the 50s, it was a very, very male writing and publishing scene. Much more so than the 20s and 30s had been.
Who have been your mentors then, in terms of guiding you in what you do?
I think people I've read. Mm. I had a very good high school English teacher called Bessie B. Billings, and I had some excellent college professors, but they were not teaching me how to write. What they were teaching me was that writing was an important thing to do, which is a different sort of thing, but I think very necessary for someone to believe if they're going to do it.
Has anyone influenced you enough to make you change your direction?
They tried.
But didn't succeed.
Well, remember where this was. It was Canada in the 50s. It was still very much a colonial mentality, and there just weren't any really visible international Canadian writers except L.M. Montgomery, who wrote Anne of Green Gables. So you really felt you were not standing on the shoulders of giants within your own country, and that real literature came from Britain or it came from the United States, and that you would probably have to leave your own country if you wanted to be a real writer.
Did it feel like you were pioneering at all, considering all the challenges?
I think it actually gives you an astonishing amount of freedom.
To go through that?
Well, you feel, it's open space.
That's right.
So there are downsides to it, people point and laugh. But the upside is, look, you can do anything in this space. You're not up against Emily Dickinson or William Shakespeare.
So if the beginning is the hardest part, what's the sense of feeling you get at the point of completion?
First of all, relief. Second, deprivation. You feel that you're no longer, that this world that you're in is now going to go away. There used to be a convention amongst writers. They would write something at the end of the book called the envoy, and that usually went something like, "Go, little book, out into the world. Goodbye. Here's your lunch pail. Boo-hoo." They don't come back bringing their laundry, but you have to send the book out into the world where you do not know how it will be received. And you also then have to separate yourself from it. So you're in it and then you're not in it. So of course you usually have, and it's standard, you have a feeling of, what am I going to do now? This is pretty depressing. One
thing that you have done, achieved with your success, is the ability to have a voice in the community. And I know you've been fairly active when it comes to stating, political stance or, stating a view on politics. Is that a sense of responsibility, or is it just something you took an interest in?
You know what? The real truth is that artists get shoved to the forefront in those situations because they don't have the kind of job in which their employer is going to look at them in a funny way if they do those things. So because they're self-employed and because words are their métier, they often, you do it because you can. Now, I happen to be lucky in that I live in a country in which nobody's going to shoot me or put me in jail for doing that. I'm very conscious of that, which is why we got together and formed PEN Canada in the 1980s, primarily around the issue of writers who are put in jail or killed for their voice.
Well, also you campaigned a fair amount on behalf of human rights, and it's a theme that often features in your books as well, in your stories at least. Do you raise that issue because you want that awareness of it? I mean, you seem to have it in your books and in real life too.
I think it's just a description of the world. But if you're describing the world, I hate to break this to you, but you will find that things are not evenly distributed. So when you set out to describe the world, that's part of what you're going to be describing. There are inequalities in power. There are different ways in which people use power, and there are inequalities in wealth, and there are all of the attitudes and emotions and circumstances that come along with those things, and it's just part of the description of the world.
But keeping it contained in a book, as opposed to going out there and actually being out there as a public voice as well, you have the option not to.
Yes, I do have the option not to. That's true. I suppose I do. Let's say that I was the president of my class's Red Cross Club in grade 3. I think it's indelibly ruined me. I was a brownie of all things. I think that kind of etches you for life.
What about the environment? I know that's something you're very concerned with, and you actually took the effort to make your house more green, more environmentally sound. What did you do?
Okay, that theme has really been with me all my life because my parents were early conservationists of the small group of persons considered a bit nutty at the time.
At that time, yeah.
So I've seen that theme all my life. I've seen it expand recently, really quite remarkably. So the house thing, yes, well, you can get an energy audit of your house, and then you can do things like replacing all of the windows, etc. But we could go down the list of things. You probably know what those things are.
You must feel fairly vindicated, though. As you say, if it was an early part, when a time when people were considered a bit nutty for taking care of the environment, now it's one of the prime concerns.
It's not just one concern. There's a number of things that are linked, and they are the climate change, the world food problem, which is influenced by the climate change, and the species crashes that are going on, which are influenced by both of those things. And the fourth one would be, which I've mentioned already, is the education of women, because that's going to be a big factor. Women are a driving economic force. They do the majority of the domestic spending, and the choices that they make can really influence things. And I'll put in a word for organic, shade-grown, fair trade coffee here. Coffee being the most traded substance on the planet, second only to oil. And if you do the organic, shade-grown, fair trade, you're not only helping people, you're helping birds and environments, and you're helping climate change because you're getting forest cover.
Now, it's interesting, you will, like people, creative people like yourself, leave behind those wonderful stories that you've created. But how would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
We used to, well, I'm Canadian, we make jokes about things like that because we don't go in for being hugely famous. We think it's a bit pompous. So we used to have chats about what we would be. You know, would we be a bar? Would we have a bar named after us? Would we maybe be a tea shop? Would we be a statue? Would we be a parquet? So I can't really answer that question in any sort of straight-faced way.
But perhaps an environmental park, something positive.
Yes, well, I'm already a lake.
Okay.
It's near Sudbury.
Margaret Atwood, it was an absolute delight talking with you. Thank you so much.
Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.